The record reflect the presence of counsel, the defendant, and the jury. Mr. Barker, you may proceed.
Thank you. Seb, before the break, I was asking you about the accuracy of Nilos and what could make it more accurate. How many Nilos records have you reviewed yourself?
So the ZX system itself has mapped over 90 million. I personally, in the last couple of years, have reviewed well over 100 different Nilos reports. I'd be pressed to even give you an exact number. It's a lot. I look at it pretty much on a weekly basis. And in that process, we're talking tens of thousands, for myself personally, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individual Nilos hits. As an example, this one for the device ending in 3215 for the records that I received is over 7,000 Nilos hits in that set of records for just one case. So tens to hundreds of thousands of individual hits, well over 100 different cases.
And we talked about that that number ending in 3215, previously identified as the defendant's cell phone number. How does that stack up? The Nilos records for that number stack up to these other cases you've reviewed?
So for the Nilos individual records that I've seen over that time period, I can only...
Relevance?
You want me to respond?
With a very brief response.
Talking about...
Oh, you know, no speaking objections.
Of course.
Yes, I'm looking for a response if you have one.
I have one. We're talking about the accuracy of these particular records according to his experience.
The objection's overruled.
So in my experience of looking at Nilos records, this would rank as the second best that I've ever seen. There was a case in Colorado that I've seen those records as well, and the Nilos was... That phone was also actively using a lot of GPS, and they were a little bit tighter, a little bit better. So out of all the over 100 cases I've looked at, I would call this second best.
Thank you. Let's go back to the screen again, the guide, if you will. We just left off at this screen. Talk about what we're looking at here.
It's just an example. You've seen now what that H-plane will look like on the map for voice calls, text messages, and data connections in relevance to AT&T records. This will look different. There'll be circles. There'll be the size of the circle, that outer diameter, if you will be based on what AT&T is tracking as what they're calling location accuracy. In this case, that's what it would visually look like on a map if it was 25 meters. But these things can range anywhere from 25 all the way up to 25 meters all the way up to 35,000 meters. So they can get quite large. But that's a visualization of what they could look like if put on the map with the varying degrees of size. The great thing about Google Earth is that easily down to within centimeters and meters, we can measure distance. So if the records say, in this case, hey, the outer circle's at 25 meters, that if we measure that, that's going to be at 25 meters from that given Latin law.
Can I ask you about that, Seb, before we
Sure.
move on? Does that mean that the individual with the device was in that red circle area?
Maybe. Sometimes yes, and in other times no. The relevance of whether it says 25, 50, 100 meters, 75 meters versus 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 meters is in a set of records when I consistently see 25, 25, 25, 25, 50, 25, 25. You have to actively be using a lot of GPS on that device. That's the only time that they get dialed into that accuracy. But to be clear, they are piggybacking off of that GPS signal. They're not the app actually creating it. So they're going to be close. They'll be in a general vicinity, but they may not follow that route perfectly like your little blue dot does in Google Maps. But it'll be along that route for sure, but only if the phone is actively engaged pulling a lot of GPS, whatever app that might be.
Is that why it's important to look at the totality of these red dots, for instance, so it will show a picture, in other words?
It's absolutely critical. Nilos, you're going to see it, depending on the individual's records, is going to run the gambit. That pendulum has a wide swing. And with some people, as an example, what if you turned your location services off on your phone? That is an option. You can do that. As an example, with an Android phone, if you turned your location services off, you cannot utilize Google Maps because Google Maps has to have access to GPS. And when you kill the location services, your phone cannot utilize GPS. There's only one thing that will override that, and that's a 911 call. That's it. It's the only exception. So if somebody did that, as an example, turned off location services, now we have to go to the other database in AT&T, which is timing, and they don't have that dialed up. So all of a sudden now, very few Nilos hits, 15,000, 20,000, 25,000. Like, it looks completely different as far as what it looks like when your device is really using a lot of GPS.
Now, in this case, when you're mapping the defendant's number, did you put a limit on how wide that range can be? You're talking about the radius. Did you put a limit on that?
I did. So in this particular PowerPoint, I limited 200 meters or better. I want to focus on the stuff that we know can be accurate. So for the PowerPoint, when you see a video vignette, we're focused on Nilos hits that are 200 meters or better. To be clear though, the KML, I can show all Nilos hits, regardless if they're bigger than 200 meters or not. So we have the capability to look at all of the Nilos.
All right. Let's go to the next slide and tell us what we're looking at.
So this is the last slide in the explanation guide, and this references the raw data that we will see in this PowerPoint. So both devices are on AT&T. So the file names will be duplicates except for those numbers. So as an example, CDRs, these are actually the phone records themselves. There's 2 report AUs, 1 for each phone. In the file name, what makes them different is the number after the AU underscore. Those are the AT&T case numbers that were assigned to the search warrant that was written by law enforcement. Additionally, I have 2 Nilos reports, 1 for each phone, and you'll see how the AT&T case numbers match, depending on if we're talking about the device ending in 3215 or 0873.
Now, just broad strokes of the Nilos records for the one ending in 3215 identified as a defendant's cell phone, better or worse than the Nilos records for Sasha's cell phone?
Significantly better, but vastly more accurate. That pendulum, our victim's phone is on the other end of that pendulum. The Nilos data is just not good at all.
And would
It's
that
fair, but it's not good.
Sorry to talk over you there. Would that have something to do with the way she was using her phone or what type of phone she had even?
100%. Like, for whatever reason, to be clear, her phone is capable of data. We're going to see data connections. The reason that's relevant is because if you were using an app of some kind that's going to, navigation, as an example, is going to utilize GPS, the phone has to have data. It can't be such an old phone that it can only do voice and text. It has to have the capability for data. We are going to see in her report AU, the CDR, data connections. So for sure, that phone could do data. But the Nilos report is just sparse at best.
All right. Let's go to the maps. Why don't you explain the timeline there?
Okay. So to orient everybody, we're looking at that Arizona, New Mexico region. And we're starting on the 18th of January. We're zooming into the Phoenix area. And we're going to continue to zoom in to the western edge of Phoenix, down close to Luke Air Force Base. And initially, for a while, we're only going to be looking at Nilos data. So there is Luke Air Force Base, kind of the edge of it, and we're getting 2 different Nilos hits here. Now, the first one on the left, so there's a grouping of Nilos hits right here in this area on the left. The time The last time we see the device in that vicinity is at 8:39 a.m. the morning of the 18th, January 2020. By 9:04, the device has moved to the east and is located over here. Directly to the south of that is the gate. This is still on Luke Air Force Base. If I drive directly to the south, there's the Kayenta gate, that's what they name it, to exit Luke Air Force Base. And you have Glendale Avenue that is open to the public down here to the south. So at 9:04 a.m. is one of the first activities that we see this device beginning to leave Luke Air Force Base. 9:04 a.m. on the morning of January 18th, 2020.
So let me ask you a couple questions about the tracks labels there and the information below. So we have the target number, and that's the red dot, represented by the red dot, right?
That's correct.
And then below that is the location accuracy, and you were talking about that earlier. That's the radius that you were referring to, correct?
Yeah, in this case, the ones where we're pulling the time off did have a location accuracy assigned by AT&T at 25 meters.
And again, that's not to say that the device is within that radius, but it's assigning a kind of a value to the accuracy. Is that right?
Correct. All I'm applying to this is that that device is in this vicinity during these time frames, and if it stopped moving, that stagnant activity, it depends on the chattiness, is the word I would use, of this location data. And by chattiness, if I was only getting one of these every 30 minutes, that's not very chatty. But if the time between hits is seconds or just a couple of minutes, and I just continuously keep getting these Nilos hits, that's chatty. When you give me chatty location data, regardless of what it is, I can start to articulate very well with mapping when your device is stagnant. It's not, it moved into an area and now it's settled down. It's either moving very, very little or it's not moving at all. It's stagnant activity. Versus when we see movement, it's going to be very obvious when this device is clearly moving on a given route.
Does the chattiness increase, or is it shown by if the person's using like a GPS navigation app?
Any app that is actively using GPS, the more it's using GPS, Google Maps as an example, that chattiness in Nilos is going to dramatically increase because there's a lot there for it to piggyback off of.
All right, so the more red dots we're seeing, the more chatty. Is that fair?
That is a fair statement.
Okay. All right, and then just below the accuracy, there is a latitude, longitude. You've referred to that, so that's the actual coordinate we're referring to.
Yep.
And then the time zone, just reference that for us.
So with AT&T, they put all of their records in what is referred to as UTC time. That's Greenwich time over in England, where all time zones originate from. In the state of Arizona, we don't do daylight savings time. Neither does UTC. So Arizona is always consistently 7 hours behind UTC. And under time zones there, the original records, as an example, that 09:04 a.m. hit, the original records were 16:04. We subtract 7 hours to make up UTC back to Arizona time. So locally, that time was 9:04.
We heard some testimony yesterday from folks that worked at the Luke Air Force Base, and they similarly use the UTC time. They refer to it as Zulu time. Is that the same thing?
That's the military equivalent to UTC time.
All right. Anything else we should look at on this page?
It just, the significance of this is that at 9:04, we see clear movement of the beginning of what's going to be a route that this device is going to travel.
All right. Let's go to the next slide and tell us what we're looking at.
So as the device departs Luke Air Force Base, we're going to see clear travel to the north. It will travel through the Peoria-Phoenix area and then north on I-17. We're going to get to a specific spot on I-17, and we're going to zoom in right here. Now, what's important to understand about this Nilos data, and this is critical that we must do with Nilos data, because Remember that pendulum, like it can swing vastly in either direction is it going to be really good or is it not going to be really good? So corroborative evidence, anything I can corroborate that this location data is accurate, I want to be able to show that this is in line with other pieces of evidence. If those other pieces of evidence have nothing to do with cellular activity or GPS, basically radio waves of any kind, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a way to double check this stuff to make sure it's accurate. We must do our due diligence to show this, because the reality is there could be some evidence out there that might be exculpatory in nature, meaning that it can show that this evidence isn't accurate and it actually supports something that the defense might want to bring up. So it's critical. In this case, this is going to be one of the first pieces of evidence that I have that I can look at a location with a date and time that has nothing to do with cellular activity as far as radio waves or GPS. So northbound on I-17, I'm getting two groups of Nilos hits here, approximately 10:01, and this is that northbound travel. And you can clearly see that those 25-meter hits are not falling exactly on the interstate. Like, we can clearly see that. But the speed at which they're being annotated in the records is the same speed as what the GPS is, as an example, if navigation was being utilized. You also notice that the red dots themselves are in a straight line. This is going to become, in the future, we're going to look at the difference between navigation, GPS perfectly following the interstate, your little blue dot in Google Maps, versus Nilos, which goes with these straight vertical lines and straight horizontal lines. And I'll give you some examples of what that looks like here in a moment. But 10 o'clock, 10:01, this device is northbound according to the Nilos in this area of the interstate in Arizona. Now, in the extraction of the defendant's phone, I was given something called a Celebrite extraction. And what this is software that they can plug your phone into that will pull everything off of that phone. We can see content, we can see pictures, text messages, phone calls. There's all these different location data collected by the phone, all this different data. Well, that would include your pictures. If you take a picture of your phone and it's in your phone, we can extract it. And this extraction will say, here's the date and time of when that picture was taken. So here's a picture that was pulled from the extraction. We can see if this truck's overheating or on fire. I can't speak to that, but obviously this large tractor trailer truck is having an issue. The device that we're tracking, 3215, took a picture, and we're seeing that picture right here. If we zoom in, all I did was zoom in on that picture. I can see a sign up ahead of those two cars. I can make out the word horse and wreck and what appears to be a 2, maybe a 4 for the exit number. But I can also see the background. I can see this imagery. I can see the terrain. And in the extraction, we can see that this photo was taken at 10:01 on the morning of the 18th, January 2020. If I go back one, this Nilos is in the same area at 10:01 on the same morning. And we can confirm this picture because Google Earth and Google Maps offers us Street View. So we know this picture was taken at 10:01 in this location. And if I go to that same area within Street View, the truck's not there. This is Street View, but we're in the same area. And when we zoom in, there's horse. In this case, it's not blocked, so we can say it says Horse Thief Basin. We could see wreck in the picture. It's recreational area, exit 248. And the terrain is the exact same terrain that we saw in the background of the truck. So this is a very within meters of the location of where that picture was taken at 10:01 a.m. on that morning. And our Nilos data is in the same area. So that pin on the map is where Google Maps, where I pulled that imagery that matches that photo. So this Nilos is now corroborated to be in this location at the same time of when that picture was taken.
So in other words, the Nilos hits, they're sandwiching that timestamp on the photo. Is that right?
Correct. It's in very close proximity of where that photo was taken.
And it even goes down to the seconds, right? So 10, 49 seconds, and then you go to the photo and it's...
The photo has it at 0 seconds, and we're looking at 10, exactly straight up 10 and 49 seconds versus 10, 0, 1, and 21 seconds.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the map again.
All right, so from here, we're going to continue to go north on I-17. Just follow the trail up to the next location. And I'm going to get a second photo in this area from the same device. Now, this is a good kind of an area right here where the Nilos, it's not quite as good as the last one, and we'll talk about it here. The Nilos is in close vicinity to where this photo will be taken at 11:10:43. The photo itself is as you're driving, you're south of Flagstaff, driving north on the interstate, and you get a picture of the San Francisco peaks. We do get an exit sign there, and when we zoom in, we can see that that's exit 333, Kayenta Boulevard, Mountain Air Road. It is at 11:09 a.m. on the 18th of January. Our Nilos is at 11:10, but it's past that location. So 11:09, 11:10. Still in the same general vicinity, and it corroborates that we can absolutely track that device from the Air Force Base to the location of the first photo. Now we're tracking that device to the location of the second photo. And in Street View, we find there's exit 333, Kayenta Boulevard, Mountain Air Road, and we have the same mountains in the background. Even the trees in the background match. There at the top of the tree there, you get a gapping in the pine needles up on this tree right here. And in Street View, we see that same tree with the same gapping. So same location, both photo and the Nilos data in close vicinity to each other.
And so this also demonstrates that there's some travel, right? There's not stagnant activity at this point.
None that I've seen. Seconds pulled over on the side of the road. Short of that, nothing of significant minutes at all. No, nothing that would be stagnant.
So up until this point, leaving the Air Force Base up until this point, it appears that it's continuous travel, right?
It would. If I can go into Google Earth, pick any two locations, check what the drive time, the miles would be between those two locations, the best route, and how long it would take you. That's a Google Maps function, but we can use it in Google Earth. I can then compare it if I have chatty Nilos on that exact same route, and we can compare the two. Does it add up or does it not add up? And in this case, they add up very well.
Let's go to the next slide.
From here, we're going to continue to see movement to the north. Very short period of time on I-40, but then the device is going to go north on Highway 89, get off onto 160, and we are going to see that device now up on the Navajo Reservation in the area of Kayenta, Arizona. And we're going to get a gap here. So I get a grouping of Nilos hits down here to the southwest. The town of Kayenta is right here on 160, and then I get a grouping of Nilos here. So there's a gap. The device was here. I don't get anything under 200 meters to this location, and then it starts again here. The time period is 1325. That's where we lose these hits. But we see it again past Kayenta at 1355. So 1325 to to 1355. It doesn't take that long to drive straight through that area. There is time enough here to have a stop to address that. So do we have any corroborating evidence that shows that maybe there was a stop in Kayenta? There's a McDonald's there in that town. There's only one, and it's at the intersection of 160 and 163. McDonald's has been there for a number of years, and what we're going to find is that there is a bank statement for a stop at this McDonald's. It will address the date and time. We also have a receipt that shows that the device stopped at this McDonald's and made a purchase. There's the receipt itself, and you can see Kayenta, Arizona, with a date and time of January 18th at 1:42 p.m., which falls in the middle of our Nilos times, so that's right in the middle. Plus, highlighted on there is an excerpt from the credit card statement showing the date and time. You can even see the time of purchase at 1:42, and the bank or the credit card account is registering it at 13:44, just a couple of minutes later. But the addresses and the location match up for that area.
So in other words, if I understand you correctly, these groupings on either side of Kayenta we see there suggest that there's stagnation, there's a stop. Is that right?
Correct. If I did a Google Maps drive check between that grouping to the next grouping and see how long would it take to drive from A to B, and then I look at the times of the Nilos, it's longer, minutes longer. So it would suggest that there could have been stagnant activity in the area. Do I have evidence to back that up? And in this case, we do, with the receipt and the credit card statement that shows that there was a stop in between those times in this area.
And the groupings in the Nilos hits, that doesn't mean that he stopped in those groupings in that area. Is that right?
There are more than one Nilos hit there, but they're separated by seconds. So no, I saw nothing in the records that would suggest that the device stopped in those areas.
All right, thank you. Go to the next slide.
After the stop at McDonald's, the device is going to continue across the reservation and enter New Mexico. And next time we're going to see it, it's in the location of Farmington. And what we're going to see is we do get a sign of stagnant activity. So all of the Nilos, there's multiple hits here, but they're all piling up on the same lat long. And you can see we got a couple of different radiuses there. A lot of them are 25 meters. There was a couple that was a little bit larger there, but the lat long isn't really moving. It's just stagnant activity. From 1554 to 1600, there's at least 6 minutes of stagnation here within the Nilos. And we have another stop in the credit card records at a speedway, and the address was 1020 Bisti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, B-I-S-T-I highway. So we know that the device was in this area and that the records matched that there was a stop for $31 at that particular store with the speedway, and the address matches the records. So stagnant activity, and in the credit card records, a reason why this would be stagnant here, making a purchase for $31 at that speedway.
Great, thank you. Let's go back to the map. Tell us where it goes next.
From here, we're going to go through Farmington to the eastern side, kind of move up a little bit to the north. And the very first time that we see this device in this neighborhood, the very first Nilos hit, having dropped down south off of that highway, is going to be at 16, 14, and 42nd. So that's the very first time we get any Nilos in this area. And we're going to get several hits here over a period of time. It's an indication of stagnant activity. The device could be moving around this neighborhood, but the device doesn't leave this neighborhood. This activity that we've seen so far is very chatty in nature. And if it were to travel back to the west or down to the south or continue to the east, I would expect to see that activity. And we don't. It just continuously just keeps on chattering, but staying in this vicinity. So somewhere in this neighborhood, starting at 1614.
Now that's, just so we're clear, 1614 is 4 p.m. or 4:14 p.m., is that right?
Correct. Apologies, I'm a military guy, so there is no 4 p.m. It's 1600.
Right.
But yes, that would be 4:14 p.m.
All right. Can you, would you drop us down there to Street View? Could we see what we're looking at here?
I would have to jump out of this presentation. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll stay right there. We're just jumping out of presentation view.
And these would be the
Now,
KML.
I'm going into the KML itself.
That's 169 for the record.
If I orient ourselves here, this is going to be the same neighborhood. And we do have varying options of where we can drop into Street View. And I'll get us kind of oriented in here.
Yeah, if you could pull up kind of the groupings you were talking about earlier, and if we could just
Sure.
drive around.
There we go. All right, so this was one of the initial hits on the way in. And then once in the neighborhood, all that stagnant activity is going to be in one of three locations. So it kind of does some bouncing around between these three areas. We get a device, multiple hits there, multiple hits over here, and some hits down here. So the device is in this neighborhood. Could it move around this neighborhood and still get these hits? Yes. But even, this is coming into the neighborhood. If the device even moved up into this area, we would see hits, but we don't. So the stagnant activity is down here. As far as Street View goes, anywhere where I have blue, we could go into Street View. Is there a particular area?
Can we visit all three of those areas around those areas where the groupings are?
Sure. As an example, if I go down to the one to the south, just to give you an idea of what this terrain looks like. This is kind of a high desert, is I guess the best way to describe it. So desert-like environment, sparse vegetation, but at some altitude. We're not talking sea level. So this is an area down south as an example of what that vicinity can look like.
Now, we've had some testimony earlier that talked about this oil plant, some type of power plant in that area south of the Mennonite church. If you could, just go forward a little bit for us.
That would be in that general area right there. That's south of the church.
All right, great.
And we ended. That's where Street View ends. I don't have an arrow to go any far further.
Thank you. Could we go back to aerial view again, and then let's visit another one of those grouping sites. And while we're doing that, Seb, that yellow pin, that's near where the church is that right?
That was the area I was given as the last known location for Sasha that's being referred to as the abduction site.
Thank you.
So this would be, out of the three locations, the one up to the northeast. A little bit of elevation here.
Let's just walk down this road for a little bit. You could just take us right down to where it runs into the highway.
That red truck there is where the highway is located.
All right. So we've had testimony about this country road here that travels kind of north-south. Can you take us aerial view again?
Sure. So kind of northeast to southwest, Highway 350. And that's right where we were at right there.
All right. Let's visit that last grouping over there.
It's about as close as I can get to it right there. So the church itself, right here. Again, it's an uphill climb.
All right.
And to be clear, these images can be dated. In this case, the street view that we're here is February '08. So if there's anybody who's locally from this area, it could definitely look different. So terrain very typically doesn't change, but obviously buildings and houses and things of that nature could change.
All right, let's go back to the map. I did have some questions about the timing. You mentioned 4:14 p.m. was when this cell phone arrives at this location, or at least that's the first hit, right?
The very first hit we see out of the multiple hits that we're going to get in this area, the very first one is over here to the northeast, and it is at 4:14 p.m.
And then it's stagnant in this area as we're talking about these groupings. It's not leaving this area. When's the last time it's in this area?
The last time that we will see this device in the area will be just prior to 1945. This hit right here is the top northern hit. It's row number 5403. This hit up here is the first time that we're away from those three down south. And this one is at 1945, so 7:45 p.m. in 50 seconds, so close to 7:46. And it has left the area of stagnant activity. And from here, the device is going to move to the west. So approximately 7:45 p.m. will be the last time we see this device in this area.
So help me do some math. 4:14 p.m. to 7:45 p.m.
We're looking about 2 hours and 20 minutes if we're going down to the minute scale here. So approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes, 3 hours and 31 minutes of stagnant activity in this neighborhood. 3 hours and 31 minutes.
All right, thank you. So after 3 hours and 31 minutes in this area, again, stagnant activity, where does it go next?
Well, there's some more activity that we have going on in here.
I'm sorry.
So let's kind of see what else we got going on. So now for the first time, we're seeing some activity from our victim's phone, so from Sasha's phone. I looked at activity to see, do we see activity from her phone that matches close to that same timeline? The device is there well before 1613, but I'm trying to match up those times. So the very close to that 4:14 time period, PM, we have 4:13, a data connection from Sasha's phone. We have multiple connections throughout that same 3 hour and 31 minute. And the last time we have a connection to an AT&T cell site from her phone in this area is at 1952.
So just to orient us again, the blue, that's Sasha's device, right? Her cell phone.
Correct. And these are data sessions that we're seeing, and there's other connections in there, but no, we just don't have any good Nilos for her phone. So I'm not getting that tight, close vicinity Nilos like we saw with those breadcrumb-like trails from that Luke Air Force Base all the way to this area. She's in the general vicinity of this area of where those blue shapes are. And we're seeing a competition here. There's two cell sites. I've got the one up to the north, and I've got the one down to the south, and you can see that the azimuth lines almost oppose each other. This one's facing north, this one's facing down to the southwest, and it's a fight. This is a competition. Who gets the best quality signal? And as she's in there for a duration of time, it's jumping back and forth. At one moment, that's the best quality signal. A moment later, the southern cell site's the best quality signal. So we get two overlapping H planes in this area. It clearly shows that the device is in the general vicinity of this neighborhood, which would match visual observations of Sasha from other people in the area.
So let me ask you, Seb, is her device then somewhere within that blue area up until that point?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And doesn't depart the area before that latter part of the late 1900s, 7 p.m. time period going into early 8 p.m. time period.
All right, thank you. If we go to the next slide.
So from here, overall activity for our device ending in 3215, we do get 3 outgoing connections during this time period. So there's 3 examples within that window, that 3-hour and 31-minute window of outgoing activity. The relevance of this is a pattern of life, if you will. As an example, if I were to exchange my phone with anybody in this room, we exchange phones for a 24-hour period. We don't know each other. Your inner circle of your most contacted people, both incoming and outgoing, and mine aren't the same. The relevance here is that your incoming activity, if I had your phone, is still going to be your incoming activity. Now, I don't know these people, so I'm not going to answer the phone. You don't know my people, you're not going to answer your phone. But if I have to make an outgoing connection, I'm going to call my people, you're going to call your people. So the relevance is when we get outgoing connections, are they going to people that are clearly within the person who has that device, 3215? Is that their normal people in their circles? Who is that outgoing activity going to? So one of the first ones we see is at 4:50 p.m., and it's an outgoing text message going to a device ending in 4189. 4189 is the 11th most contacted person within this set of records. So not in the top 10, but there's a normal occurrence of talking to this person. It's the 11th most contacted person. Not a number, as an example, we've never seen before in these records. From here, we'll go to the next outgoing activity. A change in cell sites, but still in the area. Now we're at 4:55 p.m., and we have an outgoing voice call. This voice call lasts for over 25 minutes, and it's going to the 3rd most contacted person in these records, and it's going to, the device ends in 2044. And we're at 4:55 p.m.
Now, Seb, we've had testimony previously that identified that number as Samuel Gooch. That was, you're saying, a phone call?
That was an outgoing phone call with, so the call is outgoing to Samuel Gooch, to his device.
And the duration of the call was what?
Just over 25 minutes in duration.
Thank you.
So that would get us in to the early 5 p.m. time period. From here, we're going to get one more outgoing call. we shift now. Because that can seem confusing sometimes. Hasn't left the area, but we keep seeing that little bit of a shift. Now it's on the north cell site. Now it's on the south cell site. It's competition. Who gets to win best quality signal? And that's what we're seeing here. It's overlapping coverage. This is ultimately what all cell phone companies want. Surround you with cell sites. Let your phone determine which one is the best quality signal and let it do its thing. So we're seeing a visualization of that competition. So now it's 6:25 p.m. and we get another outgoing text message to 9564, and that would be the fourth most contacted person in these set of records. The relevance of these three outgoing connections is that all of them are well within the normal pattern of life for this device for the user who's using this device. From here, now I'm gonna put a lot on the map. We got some stuff to talk about. The red dots moving off to the west, that was that Nilos data. And we saw examples of that before. Like when it follows the route, it is very close to the route. So it traveled back to the west. When it left that area, so did Sasha's phone. Now we're well to the west of Farmington. The device is located just to the east of the Arizona border. So the device is located right here inside these H-planes. And what we're seeing is data activity. These aren't voice calls or text messages, from both devices, they're data. They're hitting a cell site just far west of Farmington, but we're also seeing those last couple of AT&T cell sites in Colorado. And interestingly enough, both devices hit the same cell site up here, up to the north. One, Sasha's hits first at 8:53 p.m. and 19 seconds, where our device in red, 3215, is going to hit the same cell site and the same sector at 20:54 and 22 seconds. So barely more than a minute difference. Same cell site, same sector. So both devices are traveling back to the west, but with these H-planes, those are sizable. We're very, very rural out here. Both devices are somewhere in this area, but our Nilos is right there. So our device, 3215 in red, is clearly right on Highway 160, well within the coverage area of both cell sites for handoffs.
Let me ask you a couple questions about that travel to the west. So you mentioned Sasha's phone, the defendant's phone, they're traveling west around the same time. In fact, this cell tower suggests they're right in the same area at the same time. Is that fair?
For the data connections, large same vicinity, for sure. As far as the phone ending in 3215, definitely in that small section of I-60 right there.
What significance is there to the fact that they're hitting off the tower at about the same time, a minute or so?
Because if we back it up, both devices leave the vicinity of the neighborhood within minutes of each other. And they travel all the way across Farmington together, and now they're getting ready to enter into the area of the Navajo Reservation, and both of these devices are traveling west in the same speed and the same locations in a general vicinity with each other.
Can I ask you about, you mentioned earlier, you're going to see these Nilos hitting kind of in a line pattern. Is there something we could illustrate with that in this area?
So the line pattern, I haven't pointed it out, but we've talked about it. All right, so when we see this activity, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back in the vicinity of this neighborhood. I'm going to back up. I'm going to show the complete track. And this is a really good example of the lines I was referring to. And we're seeing quite a bit of traffic here. So we're going back all the way, showing significant amount of travel right here. Now, when we stay back this far, those lat longs clearly are following Highway 160. But when we zoom in close, they're not perfectly like, let's start with like around Kirtland and go in here. They're on this route, on Highway 64, coming through this area right here. But if you'll notice, in a straight line, the highway drops to the south. The Nilos is in a straight line. The highway keeps dropping to the south. The Nilos drops to the south, but they're in a straight line. Drops to the south, they're in a straight line. Now the highway moves up to the north. What happens to our Nilos in a straight line? It moves to the north. So your GPS, like if we look at those straight lines through there, your GPS is perfectly following this route, perfectly. But this Nilos, it's piggybacking, but it isn't GPS. It's assisted GPS. And we're getting line. Oh, he's continuing to move to the south. It drops down. Line. He's moving to the south. It drops down. Line. This is how it's tracking that device. As an example, these 4 dots right here, that device is directly south of that dot somewhere on this interstate. This one, because the interstate bumps up a little bit, that's really close to where that device is, within meters. But when we move back over here, because they stay in a straight line, the device is still on the highway. And you'll notice not only are the lines in a horizontal fashion, but we also get vertical. So in this case, we get a sharp drop to the south. And what do our lines do? They become vertical. Think of these as far as following a route. There's one other thing that a lot of people can relate to with vertical and horizontal lines when it comes to mapping something, and it's the game Battleship. A1, B2, vertical and horizontal lines. That's what this Nilos records are doing. They're following vertical and horizontal lines, not precisely matching GPS, but very, very closely matching GPS. And that's how we can get, when you're traveling this highway, the dots aren't perfectly falling on the line. GPS would, but these are assisted. So they're close, but they're not exactly on there. But when you stop, because of the level of chattiness, they stop. And they just start hitting, and we get that. There's the, speak of it, there's the gas station. So the gas station's right here, and because of the level of chattiness, we get multiple hits right there because the device stopped moving. So the Nilos stopped moving, and it just piles up. It's close, but it's not quite. We're looking roughly over 400 meters between this location and where we know for a fact the device is at that gas station. The records clearly show that that device made a stop at the speedway.
So if I could ask, just to clarify a couple things. So if we were to grid this entire map, like you're saying, almost like Battleship, those dots would fall in line with that coordinate, like an intersection, right?
Very, very closely. If we measure from here to here or from here to here and just keep measuring these links, they stay very consistent. But once in a while, we may find where a particular column from here to here, it might be a little bit more than the others, but they always fall in a grid fashion consistently. No matter where we go in these records, I can show you that grid, vertical and horizontal grid, either directly on or right adjacent to the known travel pattern. And what's interesting is so we have this pin where the abduction site's at. So there's clearly our pin in the vicinity of this neighborhood. And if I go back down and I get to where I can see all the way back into the Phoenix area, and I mark, as an example, one of the gates by Luke Air Force Base, I can right-click this and say, all right, Google, directions from here, directions to here. And what Google will do is they're going to draw me a path. And they're going to say, and granted, Google is so good at this that it's right now. If there was a massive accident somewhere on this route and there was an adjustment of 15 minutes, it would adjust for that. But right now, this is the route that we would travel if we left Luke Air Force Base and went into that neighborhood within, just to the east of Farmington. That's the route. Now, if I start manipulating the timeline slider bar, what we're going to see is that this Nilos directly follows that route because that's the GPS. It's assisting it to follow, and it perfectly follows that route. Anywhere in here, especially like if we went down to the Phoenix area, and it really wouldn't matter where we went. As long as the device doesn't go stagnant, it's going to very closely match where that device is traveling. But because it does that grid thing, it's never going to be perfect. So as an example, right here, that's a pretty east-west running road, but it's not perfect. The road isn't perfectly a straight line. These dots are. So this one, that device is not in the middle of that neighborhood. It's on the freeway. It's following the 101. Now over here, it's much closely matched, but as soon as that device gets on I-17, our grid changes and now it's vertical. But it moves over a little bit, so now it's over here, and now we get a movement here. And as long as it's moving due north, our grid's here, it's over here, it's just bouncing back and forth. It's doing its best to follow the route, but it has to take the grid into account. So it's never perfectly on the interstate.
So what does Google say that route would take time-wise on a car?
So from Luke Air Force Base up to the neighborhood where the abduction is going to occur, Google would estimate it, depending on when you run it, around 6 hours and 53 minutes. I just did it right now, and it said 6 hours and 58 minutes. So there's a little bit of traffic somewhere, probably Flagstaff, because that's where all the traffic's at. So it's adjusting for that time. So we're looking at typically, normally, just under 7 hours to get from Luke Air Force Base to that neighborhood.
And what does the Nilos data tell us about how long it took the defendant's cell phone to travel from the Air Force Base to Farmington?
Well, if we look at the very first Nilos hit leaving Luke Air Force Base and the very first Nilos hit arriving in that neighborhood, we're at 7 hours and 18 minutes. And we know for a fact that there was 2 stops, one at the McDonald's and one at the Speedway. Okay. So that kind of adjusts for that little bit of time for those 2 stops.
So pretty consistent timeline.
Extremely consistent.
All right, sorry to jump out of there. Let's go back to what we were talking about, both of those devices traveling west time.
So from here, same cell site, same sector, right prior, just before the 9 p.m. time period. From here, we're going to get one more of those. This time they're perfectly matched, same cell site, same sector. The color's not blue, it's not red, because they're both are right on top of each other. The difference in timing this time is the device ending in 3215 hits first at 20:55, and then our victim Sasha's phone hits the same cell site, same sector at 20:58. So just a couple of minutes apart from each other.
Now, Seth, let me ask you, if we're in a car together, the 2 of us, and we're driving, are our cell phones going to hit off the tower at the same time?
No, it completely depends on what we're doing. Both phones are actively using data right now. Again, these are not phone calls or text message, it's data connections. They're never going to be perfectly synced. But the more chatted they are in the same general area, we could get very close in time proximities. Nilos-wise, the device is just about at the Arizona border. So it moved here a little bit more to the west. So we know that the device ending in 3215, because our Nilos is so accurate, is just prior to the border.
All right. Let's go to the next slide.
That will be the last time that we see our victim's phone. We will, in the records, we never see that phone again.
Now, when we say we won't see it again, can you account for why that's not connecting anymore? Or you just have to say it's disconnected?
The device is simply off the network, and it will never re-enter the network. Whether it was destroyed or turned off, or I can't account for why it's disconnected for the network, but completely disconnected.
All right.
From here, we're going to go back to watching the Nilos, and it's going to take the exact same route that came into Farmington. It's going to take that route back. Back that up there. Let's watch that one more time. So we're going to see those H-planes disappear as we move forward in time. Our Nilos is going to travel through the Navajo reservation, but instead of continuing on to Flagstaff, we're going to see a deviation off the known normal pattern that a navigation app would take you through this area. If you were traveling north or south from Flagstaff and you were going to cut across the Navajo Reservation, you would utilize Highway 89. It's really the only route up and through that area. But on the way back, this device is going to exit Highway 89 onto a road called Loop Road. And we can see the name there on the map. It says Loop Road right here. And all of a sudden, our Nilos line is going to go to the east. So this device came down to the intersection, and because it was balanced in the grid between this area and this area, we're getting 2 hits here, and then boom, it's going to move off to the east. And we're going to see that device 16 minutes after midnight. 16 minutes after midnight, it is definitely off of Highway 89, and we're going to continue to see movement on this loop road, which is the only route available through this area that leaves Highway 89, and it goes in a loop. It's like a reverse C. It's going to go down to the east, down to the south, make a big curve, come back to the west, and it eventually reconnects to Highway 89. This is on the southern edge is where Sunset Crater is located. So that's Loop Road.
So we've heard some testimony about this road. This is the road that would take you through the Sunset Crater area, right?
That is correct. If you entered from the northern section, that would be this turnoff.
We've also heard this road called by a different name. Is there another number that's associated with this road?
I'm sure there is, but on the map I keep seeing Loop Road, and that's, okay. I'm sure there's a county road of some kind associated with this, but I'm unaware of what that means.
That's all right. I think we'll stick with the Loop Road.
And it's paved the entire length, so it wouldn't matter what type of a Prius could travel on this road. You don't need like a 4-wheel drive vehicle. So from here, keeping in mind the grid, because this is a curvy road, what we're going to see in the records is clearly that device is no longer on Highway 89, and it's traveling, you can see the grid patterns there, it's traveling along Loop Road. But we get, and I'm going to pause it right there, we get a big gap through here. So following Loop Road all the way out here to the east of Highway 89. But then we get this section where we're going to lose Nilos. This area down here, so Sunset Crater is located right there. But we lose our Nilos, and we get a big gap, no Nilos. And then all of a sudden, just before getting back to Highway 89, the Nilos is going to return. But we get a sizable gap here with no Nilos. But Loop Road, the only way to get from this location to this location in the time that the device goes from this location to this location is continuous movement on Loop Road. There is no other option. So that vehicle's absolutely had to travel on Loop Road.
Now, excuse me, we've had some testimony about the cell phone coverage in this area being a little spotty. In fact, the officers had to leave the area to make a phone call. Does that affect the Nilos data at all?
Well, it can, because there's no connection to the network. As I zoom in here a little bit, let me pause it again right here. The magic spot is right around Sunset Crater. Once in a while, we are going to see a Nilos hit. We'll see one here in a moment. That is just to the east of Sunset Crater, but no further. This is the area where the device can re-engage with the AT&T network. But from here all the way back up to that location where we lose the Nilos, there just isn't. It's either very sparse or no connection whatsoever. If you're on an AT&T phone, you're not making any connection at all.
In other words, it reappears at this area.
Close to the Sunset Crater is when you get back into that connectivity with AT&T. Interestingly enough, if we think about it, there are no cell sites for AT&T on the Navajo Reservation. But clearly, we had Nilos both across and back on the Navajo Reservation. So if there's no AT&T towers, how would it be possible to have Nilos? And that's because AT&T is the foundation, the platform for all cellular networks in the United States. They're the original. If depending on how old you are, you remember when AT&T used to be Ma Bell. That was the original, and then they changed to AT&T. So Verizon, T-Mobile, Cellular One, foundationally, their platform is AT&T. And that Nilos is actively tracking across that reservation, no problem at all, because all of them pump that back into AT&T because they're the foundation. But now we are really isolated. There is no option for Cellular One. There's no option here. We have nothing, and we lose AT&T.
Now, can you back up a little bit? Just tell us again, remind us, what time are we talking about and what day?
So the first time that, here, I'll just go through this here. So that activity that we see, and the first time we see that phone back in the vicinity of Sunset Crater, it got off on Loop Road on the north section just after midnight. It is now 1:03 a.m. and the device is west of Sunset Crater, west of Sunset Crater.
Now, if we were to take a drive from that north loop entrance and driving it around, you said it was at C, right, around Sunset Crater.
Correct.
How long would it take us, if we were driving speed limits, from the entrance to the spot we're talking about?
Well, from the entrance past the spot we're talking about, just over to Highway 89 is a 55-minute drive, is the approximate drive time. We're talking a little, was it 16 minutes after midnight off of Highway 89, and now it is 1:03 a.m. So it's matching up very well, and we're not quite to Highway 89. There's still a few miles in there, so it's very close, approximate drive time. From here, what was interesting is the device passed Sunset Crater. Then it turns around and it comes back. So we went past Sunset Crater, turned around, the device comes back to the eastern side of Sunset Crater, and now it's 1:13 a.m. So 1:13 a.m., this is going to be the last time we're going to see this phone for a little while, but it's not going to leave this area. The pin over to the right is going to be where the victim's body will be recovered later. And at 1:13 a.m., this device is going to drop off the network. And we're not going to see it again. It's back in that area with no service. The next time we see that, over here, look at the road real quick. So this is still Loop Road, just so everybody's tracking, a paved road. And where the body will be recovered, technically there's two routes in there, just to the north and south of that location. And the southern road's more of a gravel road. It's not paved, but it's in really, really good condition.
Right before we take the break, sorry, Judge, can I ask one more question?
Okay, it's 12 noon.
Sorry. Can you just tell us briefly, Sev, the next time we see this phone, what's the time?
So the last time we see it is 1:13, and the next time we're going to see that phone will be in the same vicinity as Sunset Crater, just to the west of it, on its way back to Highway 89. And that area right here, the first time we see it there, will be 03:33. So this is where we're going to get the 2-hour and 20-minute gap. So this device goes stagnant somewhere in this area in the vicinity to the east of Sunset Crater for 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's 12:01, so I wanted you to have your lunch break. So remember the admonition. Do not talk to anyone about the case. Do not let anyone talk to you about it. That includes each other. Please keep an open mind about the case, and please do not form any opinions about the case. If you could be back in the jury room by 1:20 this afternoon, so we can hopefully call for you and get you in the courtroom as close to 1:30 as possible. Enjoy the lunch and recess. Or enjoy your lunch, that's what I'm trying to say. Please be seated. You can step down if you wish. Anything we need to put on the record or address before we take our lunch recess, council? Okay, all right, so then, again, as usual, if you could be back between, say, about 1:15, 1:20, council, so if something comes up over the lunch hour that you want to address with the court, we'll have a few minutes before we call for the jury. We stand in recess.